Welcome to our session today. We're going to be looking at what children learn from story time, and that's presented by me. I'm Emma Fitzgerald, and I'm an educational content lead at Twinkl on our children's books, our Twinkl Originals books. So today, our aims, we will be looking at everything children learn from story time when they listen to stories read aloud. We will explore how listening to stories supports children's vocabulary acquisition, their language development, their decoding readiness, their comprehension, their fluency, their pronunciation, their understanding of the world, their empathy, their social skills, their relationships, and more. We will pull together government guidance and relevant research to give an overview of evidence-based advice on current best practice. So whether you're new to teaching or more experienced, I hope that this session will make clear or remind you of the benefits, the educational benefits of listening to stories. And I want to empower you to prioritize reading aloud in your setting. So I'm starting with a quote from the Children's Laureate Frank Cottrell Boyce. And he says, "Our children are near the top of the global leagues when it comes to the mechanical skill of reading, but near the bottom when it comes to reading for pleasure. We've taught them all the steps and names of all the tunes, but they're not dancing. So where does a child's journey to becoming a dancer start?" It starts at the earliest stages of a child's life. The reading framework says that becoming a fluent, skilled, and attentive reader starts at the earliest stages. So what are the benefits of reading to our youngest learners, to reading with babies? Learning to read starts in the earliest stages of a child's life. Being read to is a positive bonding experience that has emotional benefits as well as educational. Being read to supports co-regulation. Sharing a story helps babies to tune into the adult's stable body rhythm, bringing calmness and concentration. Face-to-face book sharing is dialogic, active, and child-led, making for effective learning. So dialogic just means there's that back and forth. The children get the most from interactive reading when they're maybe making little responses. You're responding to how they're responding, going at their pace, maybe listening to anything that they react to, whether that's an excited look or a small noise that they might make if they're only babies. And babies need more time to process information than adults. So when we read with a very young child, it is usually child-led, so the learning can go at a child's pace. We can monitor their interests, we can monitor their attention levels, and we know when to move on. Comparing that to, say, screen learning, watching animations, watching videos, watching cartoons, it's very different. A cartoon can't necessarily respond to the children's interest and their attention and move at their pace. So the reading framework is clear that language comprehension, which is necessary for both reading and writing, starts from birth. It only develops when adults talk with children about the world around them and the books, so stories and nonfiction, they read with them and enjoy rhymes, poems, and and songs together. So hearing words and learning to use words is essential for children's developing communication, language, and literacy skills. And as children get older, they start to say familiar words they hear in books, attempting to join in. They learn what stories do, e.g. stories have a beginning, a middle event, and an ending. Children begin to associate the text on the page with meaning that is being unlocked by the adults. They know that books in English are read from left to right and that you turn the pages to continue the story. As they become more familiar with story patterns, they begin to anticipate and predict what might happen. As they experience a range of books, they begin to develop a sense of the types of stories or characters that they most enjoy, expressing a preference for some books more than others. They develop favorites that bring them the most joy. And at this early stage, we are setting the foundations for these children to choose to read later in life. So when we're reading with young children, what are we looking for? And these are taken from Development Matters. These are some of the things that we're looking for when we're reading with our youngest learners. We are looking out for them enjoying sharing books with adults, having a positive response and interest in sharing books. We're looking to see if they're paying attention and responding to the pictures and words. And that could just be, you know, we're looking, are they paying attention, but are they responding? That might be with a little gasp, a little ooh. As they get slightly older, they might begin to respond with words. They might clap happily. Having favorite books and seeking them out to share with others or enjoy alone. So if you're in your continuous provision in early years, are they engaging with the book corner? Are they bringing a book to an adult and asking to be read to? Are they maybe just sitting on the carpet and flicking through a book? Are they sharing it with a peer? We're looking to see, are they repeating any words and phrases from familiar stories? So for example, you might look to see, are they joining in with phrases like I'll huff and I'll puff when you're telling the story of the Three Little Pigs? We're looking to see, are they asking questions and about the book and sharing their own ideas? So for example, if we were in the story of the Three Little Pigs, they might ask, why is the wolf chasing the pigs? Or they might give some of their ideas on the story. They might contribute, I think the wolf is being mean, or I think he's hungry. And are we looking to see, are they engaging in play based on these favorite stories? So if they've been read the Three Little Pigs story and you were to leave out a wolf toy and maybe Three Little Pig finger puppets, are they playing with those? Are they retelling the story or parts of the story? Are they using any of the language that they heard in the story? Or they might use those characters to tell their own story or a play scenario based on the characters that they've heard in the story that you've read to them. And with young children, children often like to hear the same book again. So what are the benefits of rereading? The DFE says in the reading framework, when children ask for a story to be reread, in effect, they are asking for another chance to explore the language, the characters, and their feelings, and to relive the emotions they felt on the first reading. Children will often choose to hear the same favorite book read aloud repeatedly, sometimes many times in a row. If you work with young children or you know young children, you've probably had that experience that can be a little bit challenging if children want to hear the same, maybe quite simple book over and over again. But these repeated readings are useful in helping children to grasp the meaning and pronunciation of the words. It is comforting for children to hear the same words and to know what comes next in the story that they're becoming more familiar with. Knowing what comes next then allows children to begin to join in, maybe finishing some of the sentences, particularly if it's a rhyming story, maybe joining in with those repeated phrases like I'll huff and I'll puff. Their familiarity with the story builds, leading them to be able to retell it. And you might see that in the children acting out the story or choosing to pick the book from the book corner, sit down and maybe retell it themselves verbally. Even though they're not reading the words, they are telling that story. When children can later read for themselves, their love of this story, the familiar story, motivates them to read it for themselves. And reading a familiar story is not cheating. It is, again, building those foundations for children to understand the benefits of reading from their experiences of being read to. And that helps them to understand the benefits of reading when they later become a reader for themselves. And reading aloud to children supports oracy. So this is a finding from the Curriculum and Assessment Review, which was released by the government last year in November 2025, that in 2024, over a fifth of children did not meet the expected standards in all the early learning goals in communication and language in their early years foundation stage profile. And this might be something that you are thinking about in your setting. And if this is something that you're working to improve or address this gap in communication and language, it can be useful to keep in mind the ways in which books support communication and language. An understanding of language is essential for reading. Dr. Jo Taylor describes the process of learning to read as connecting the visual to the spoken. Supporting spoken language is one of the best ways to support children's reading. And the DFE describes reading and talking about stories as critical for developing children's language. They are reciprocal. So spoken language and reading books or hearing books read aloud, they benefit each other. Developing children's language supports their reading, and reading more supports their language. Talk about books brings particular advantages due to the ambitious vocabulary and the complex sentence structures in stories. And we're going to look at that in a little more detail now. Listening to and talking about stories and non-fiction develops children's vocabulary because they meet words that they would rarely hear or use in everyday speech. Understanding vocabulary is vital for comprehension at all stages, both reading and listening, and so for all pupils' wider learning and progress. So as well as supporting children's communication, language, and literacy skills, building their vocabulary supports all areas of learning. And we can see here that listening to books drastically increases the number of words children hear and have the opportunity to learn. By the time children are 5 years old, if they're never read to, they know fewer than 5,000 words. If they're read 5 books per day, they know almost 1.5 million words. And I've put that into a little bar chart for us to really see the gap. So on the left is the children who are never read to, and we can see the scale of the gap that exists between children when they start school, from those who are never read to, that have that smaller vocabulary, and those that have had those rich experiences with books that has helped them to develop that much, much bigger vocabulary and giving them a very different starting point. So as an example, we're going to have a look at The Grumpy Old Stone. This is a fun rhyming story about a rock that is taken on an unwanted adventure by some children. While following his journey, children encounter words in context that they might not encounter in everyday conversation. So I've picked out here words that all feature in this story: dread, despair, muttered, scowled, stooped, beckoned, intact, transformed, approached, rejoiced, sent, content, and drifted. Hearing them in an engaging story context means children are more likely to understand and store the new words. When reading aloud, the adult can briefly explain any words that the children are likely to need help with. In a story, the narrative around the words, the sentence structures, and the pictures, they all provide clues that implicitly support children's understanding of the words that might be unfamiliar. But through the story, through that teacher's explanations, through the discussion about the book and those words, they can develop their understanding. And reading stories is also a great way to support children's early phonics skills, particularly with developing their listening and attention. Children need to develop listening skills over time, deliberately building up the time that the children listen with attention and concentration. So that's from the reading framework. And stories are created to engage children. So developing the ability to listen is key to their phonics learning, and reading stories is really one of the simplest ways for you to do that. If you're going to try building up children's attention, it can be much easier to do that with a story that is, as I said, designed to engage. It's exciting, it's interesting, it's got that plot that hooks them in, than perhaps in some other ways that you might try building their attention. And it isn't the only way in which story time supports children's phonics learning. So as I said, hearing the stories helps develop their listening and attention. And they're also seeing adults make meaning from the text, and that encourages children's early curiosity in letter shapes and written words. And hearing stories read aloud often provides opportunity to notice alliteration, so words beginning with the same sound, and rhyming books support children's ability to notice words that have the same ending sounds. And as you probably all know, all of those are essential to children developing their phonics knowledge. And also in their later phonics journey, so from stage 1 or level 1 moving on to phase or level 2, 3 and beyond, pupils learn to read words at a glance more easily if when they first decode a word by saying the sounds and blending them, they know what it means. A pupil therefore might be more likely to read dog at a glance than cog, and splash rather than stash. And reading books to children really supports all of this. When children start to read for themselves, the words that they can decode are too limited to broaden their vocabulary. Through listening, they gain a collection of words that they will later recognize when reading for themselves. Decoding a word that you have heard before and understand is far more useful and satisfying than decoding a word that you don't know. Reading to children before and during their phonics journey will support their progress. This is beneficial for all children, but if we think back to the gap in vocabulary we saw earlier, reading aloud is giving us that chance to narrow the gap, to build up those vocabularies for children who might have come to us with that lower starting point. And this influential 2018 reading paper made clear that phonics is not the only skill that needs to be taught and nurtured in order to build strong readers. So these researchers made clear that decoding and linguistic comprehension are both necessary and neither is sufficient alone. And you can see here this simple diagram that helps to show that really clearly. So this is the simple view of reading, and we've kind of got two scales interacting with each other. We've got poor language comprehension going up to good language comprehension, and we've got poor word reading going across to good word reading. And we can see that our good reader is sat high up in good language comprehension, and also all the way across to the right in good word reading. They need both skills to be a good reader, sorry. But you might have children who are lower down the scale for language comprehension. They might have poor language comprehension, but really strong word reading. You can also have children that struggle with word reading, but maybe they're really strong at language comprehension. So they can sit in different parts of this, in different quadrants, I suppose, on this little diagram, depending on where they need more support and where their strengths might be. So the reading framework is really clear that comprehension does not refer to reading itself, but rather to the way in which we make sense of words, sentences, and the wider language we hear or read. So it's a different skill to just being able to decode. We also need to understand to make sense of what we've decoded. So when children first start to read for themselves, the books they are reading will contain few words, very short sentences, if any, and limited punctuation. The opportunity for complex narratives is limited by the short length of their reading books. Early phonics books are unlikely to include writing that helps children to think as deeply as they would with a longer story being read aloud to them. Young children's spoken language is usually far more developed than their current reading level, and through story time and book talk, they can develop their comprehension skills. There is more opportunity for rich discussion, e.g. about the characters' feelings and motivations when you're reading aloud to children. So, for example, disappointed and frustrated are words that most reception children have the capacity to learn and understand via a story that they hear and discuss, but that would be unlikely to feature in their decodable reading books until they're older. Their phonics book is more likely to describe a character as feeling sad, because that's decodable at the stage they're probably at, Via book talk, children can ask questions such as, why is the character disappointed? They could share another example sentence for the children to understand the word disappointed in multiple contexts, therefore embedding their understanding of the meaning. And they can encourage the children to share times when they have felt disappointed. They can encourage children to use that language themselves. We've talked a little about vocabulary, but we're also going to explore syntax, which is something that the reading framework makes clear children will benefit from learning about. And stories are a rich source of language, so that vocabulary, but also that syntax. So what is syntax? Children need to build up a range of skills and knowledge in order to read and write. Decoding, using phonics knowledge, is only part of the picture, but it's not just phonics that we use to read. Syntax is the arrangement of words and phrases to create well-formed sentences. Adults and children alike need syntax to help them read accurately. A word's place within a sentence helps us to read it correctly. And so I'm going to ask you now to just direct your attention to these 3 words on the screen that I've put there and think, can you read these words? If you were asked to say them out loud, to read them aloud now, could you do it? These are 3 words that follow regular English spelling rules and that most adults would be familiar with. You probably understand the words, but can you confidently read them? And if not, can you explain why not to yourself? So we cannot actually read these words without the syntax. We need to know the word's place in the sentence so that we know how to read it. So, for example, the first word that I gave you, it could be read or read. Len read to Ben yesterday. Len likes to read. I only know how to say each word because of the syntax, because of where it is in the sentence. The words around the word tell me how to read it. Similarly, the place in the sentence tells me that I'm going to read bow. Jay has a bow and arrow, rather than bow. Bow, they all bow to the king. And in the last one, it could be Gerald lives in the castle, but in another sentence, fire alarms save lives. It's the syntax that's telling me how to read the word in each instance. So reading is contextual, and stories support with this. Through stories, we encounter words in context, which supports our understanding of them, more so than if we are learning those words out of context in isolation, just single words. And this is taken from the Ofsted report called Telling the Story, which is about the English subject, and this was from 2024. Knowledge of language, including vocabulary, grammar, and syntax, is part of the foundational knowledge needed for reading, speech, and writing. So let's explore more how some of this foundational knowledge features in the stories that we read to children. So this is a single page taken from the same story that we looked at earlier. This is The Grumpy Old Stone, which was written to be read aloud to children. The stone had a river and whispering reeds. He'd stopped on a bank, buried deep in some weeds. There weren't any humans, just songbirds and mice. In time, the leaves fell and the stream turned to ice. And so this page includes metaphorical descriptions, for example, whispering reeds. It's also got contractions, heard and weren't. It's got compound words like songbirds. It's got the fronted adverbial in time. It's got varied punctuation. So we've got full stop, comma, semicolon, and apostrophes. We can see split digraphs in the story in the words mice, time, and ice. We've got some alternative spellings for phonemes that children will have learned initially. So we've got the E in stream, for example. We've got IR in bird. We've got UR in turned. And we've got rhyming words. We've got reeds rhyming with weeds and mice rhyming with ice. We've got some regular verbs, stopped, turned, and buried. And we've got the different rules for adding ED in those. So we've got the double consonant that you get in words like stopped, We've got the regular, just add ed, interned. And we've got buried, where you would need to turn the Y into the I to add the ed. So you've got IED at the end instead of the Y. So by reading this aloud to children, we're increasing their exposure, their awareness, and their understanding of all of the above before they will encounter them in their own reading. We are building the foundations. So we're not saying that children in reception or nursery or year one would be studying these. You wouldn't necessarily use the terminology that I've just used to explain them in this session, but having a story with them in just builds up that foundation. We're building the building blocks for later when they come to learn in more detail about these, when they're maybe being asked to study them, use them in their own writing. They will have had experience of hearing them, seeing them, understanding them, letting them, they will be absorbing them, I suppose, just through stories without being explicitly taught them. And reading it aloud to children also supports their fluency. So the way that the reading framework puts this is that reading aloud contributes indirectly to the reader's fluency as they listen to an accomplished reader bring a text to life. So that's us, the adults in the room, we're the accomplished reader. We know that modeling is a powerful tool in the early years teaching, and we can see reading aloud as the same. It's modeling for readers. And we can liken this to how babies learn to talk, through hearing their closest adults talking rather than through explicit talking instruction. So we model talking to children, they listen, they soak it up, they begin to attempt to replicate what we're doing. They basically want to be like us, and they get positive responses, they get that support, that scaffolding, that feedback. It's quite a natural way in which children learn to talk, and similarly by listening to readers it can have similar educational benefits. So when listening, children hear, for example, how a reader uses punctuation to pause, stop, or exclaim. They hear how a reader uses their voice to convey tone, and you can see me doing my best angry tone there with my voice and also my face when reading A Monster Surprise. And they can hear how a question sounds different to a command, and they can hear how to pronounce less common words correctly. The reading framework recommends that children listen without following the text and to limit the number of interruptions, and rest assured that your audience is learning from the reading itself. And here, just to maybe put us in the shoes of the children that might be listening and picking up some of those words and hearing that pronunciation, I've put here a word that was unfamiliar to me when I searched it online. I wanted to find a word that was unfamiliar that I didn't know how to pronounce, or thought that perhaps most of the people in this session would be in a similar position of not knowing how to pronounce this word. And so most adults would likely benefit from hearing this word said aloud if you were going to learn it. We would be, most of us, unlikely to be confident reading this word without hearing it said. And we would benefit from having it spoken to us by someone who did understand the word, explaining the meaning, maybe putting it into those different contexts for us, and before we're being asked to say it. So that's similar for children. If we think that their vocabulary bank, the words that they're confident with, is probably smaller than an adult's, it would be similar to them, how they might feel encountering a word through hearing it, as opposed to experiencing it as a written word that they don't know the first time that they experience that word. And reading aloud to children helps us to include all readers. So the reading framework says the text being read aloud is especially valuable for some pupils. They have access to text at the level that their peers can read independently, so they encounter the same ideas and language. The teacher is able to stop and explain words or give background information. So we can see here in this quote the true aim of inclusion, which is to remove barriers to learning, so the children can actually access the learning that their peers are doing, rather than something different. We're removing the barriers by reading to them that might stop them from otherwise accessing the same learning as the other children around them. Children of varying decoding levels can all listen to the same text being read aloud, and they have the opportunity to contribute to discussion with their peers. If we only use decodable text that children can read for themselves, then we're limiting children's chances to progress in other areas. So for example, if we think back to the model of the simple view of reading, children can be high on one scale, but maybe lower on the other. So if we just limit them to decodable text, they might be low on decoding skills at the moment, but they might have really good comprehension, or it might be stronger than their decoding, and they can be accessing those discussions about comprehension, developing those skills further rather than holding them back if we're only using their simple decodable books. During story time, more children can be developing their book talk, they can be strengthening their comprehension skills, and they can be building their vocabulary bank. And they get to enjoy and discuss more complex plots and characters than they might be experiencing through their decodable short stories. And they can hear accurate pronunciation of new or unfamiliar words that supports their speech and language. And this approach also acknowledges that reading is not a solitary activity, as it might seem. There is a social element to enjoying the same story and sharing our thoughts and ideas about it. And we can liken this to an adult book club, or thinking about how often adults who have read a book go online and they share their reviews. They want to share their thoughts, their feelings, their response to the book with other people. And I know often if I've read a book that I was told was going to be amazing and I didn't get on particularly well with it, one of the first things I do as soon as I finish is I go online and I read other reviews and try and find someone who had a similar experience to me. There's something very comforting about knowing that you were not alone. Someone else saw the same thing in that story as you did. And the reading framework also points out some of the other benefits of stories, not just on communication, language, and literacy, but in other areas. So literature is probably the most powerful medium through which children have a chance to inhabit the lives of those who are like them. All children need to imagine themselves as the main protagonist in a story. So celebrating a birthday, going shopping, being ill, having a tantrum, having their hair cut, worrying about a new sibling, being the superhero, going camping, visiting the seaside, and having adventures. And when we read stories to children, they have this opportunity to see themselves. Children's literature is often full of child characters. That makes sense in children's books. Children can relate to the characters in the books, and they can imagine themselves as those characters or doing the things in the story. Often stories will reflect experiences that children have had in their own lives. It can be exciting or comforting to see your own experiences being reflected, much like when us adults read a relatable novel and we might feel seen, to see that experience reflected back to us. It can also sometimes, if we're reading a story about a character who has been through something similar to us but isn't us, that little bit of distance can maybe help us reflect on it in a different way, or to see things differently than we might when we're just thinking about something that has affected us so directly. Perhaps seeing something similar being experienced by a character but wasn't happening to us maybe can help us think about it in a different way, gain some new perspectives on it. All children benefit from feeling represented in stories, and this can be especially powerful for children who may not always see many people like themselves in their daily lives, for example, children with a disability. As well as acting as mirrors to reflect children's own experiences, stories can open a window into other worlds or lives, which really supports children in developing their empathy. So the reading framework says that people should encounter characters, situations, and viewpoints that reflect their own lives, but allow them too to understand the lives of others. So stories help children to develop these empathy skills. To enjoy a story, we have to step into someone else's world. We see things from their point of view. We try to understand their motives and their emotions. Listening to books read aloud means that children can access new knowledge, and it's not restricted by their decoding level. For example, children can learn about Diwali through a story that's being read to them, despite the tricky W letter saying V in this word. That might not be something that ever features in a decodable reading scheme, but by reading aloud to children, we're removing that barrier. And stories can support children's understanding of the people around them, which helps them to build relationships and communicate perhaps more successfully. Through hearing stories of experiences that are different from their own, children can develop an awareness of and a respect for difference. They can learn that people might think and feel differently to them. And again, that's going to support their relationships, trying to understand that not everyone might want to play exactly the same game as them. Not everyone might like the same music as them. They might not view a play scenario that's very exciting to them as quite as exciting. Somebody might want to play in the home corner, whereas they might like to play as superheroes in the dressing up area. And that's okay, understanding that not everyone is going to have exactly the same thoughts and feelings as them. Stories can really support with that. And stories being read aloud helps children's understanding of the world. Books about space, other countries, animals, exploration, and courageous people from a range of occupations and ethnic backgrounds are rich sources of vocabulary and also knowledge. Through stories, children can step outside of their own lives and their immediate environment. They can explore the world by heading into the jungle or under the sea. They can step inside the lives and the homes of characters in other cities or even other countries. They can meet animals that live in Antarctica or in the East African savannah. And through stories, they can learn about the world. And through narrative, we can come close to feeling what it might be like to be a different person or to live in that different place. The story might give us some idea of what that's like, more so than if we just hear a fact about that place or maybe just look at a photograph. Hearing stories read aloud can also help us to create engaged readers who choose to read in the future. So it affects their motivation to read. Through the books and poems that they encounter, pupils have a chance to experience the excitement, wonder, and fascination that can come from reading, is how the reading framework puts this. So decoding can be exhausting work, really taxing for children. Listening to a fluent reader or accomplished reader, as I think the Department for Education puts it, that makes the rewards of learning to read obvious to learners. Through listening to the books read aloud, children discover that they hold information, adventure, humor, surprises, joy, and drama. And they are motivated to unlock this excitement for themselves by learning to read. If children's only experience of books is through their decoding journey, it might be harder for them to feel quite the same motivation. The data shows us that enjoying books is not a nice to have, but it is a necessity for ensuring progress. Multiple studies suggest that enjoyment is associated with higher reading performance. And the Department for Education's internal analysis of the data from the Progress in International Reading Literacy study in 2006 suggested that it was particularly narrative rather than information text that made the most difference. So another plus for the power of stories. When children enjoy reading, they read more. Reading more leads to more practice and therefore more progress. Reading aloud to children, even after they can read for themselves, increases the chances of them having a positive view of reading and choosing to read. The teacher knows the children in their class, and they can read them books that they will love, that they know will be motivating. And in turn, the reading skills and attitude that they develop has an impact in all areas of learning across subjects and not just in reading. And so here the reading framework, the government is making clear the positive benefits of reading aloud and that these can be lifelong. So whatever pupils' socio-economic background, making sure that they become engaged with reading from the beginning is one of the most important ways to make a difference to their life chances. When we're creating engaged readers, when we're trying to engage our readers, reading a variety of books aloud increases children's awareness of different text types and genres. Children benefit from access to stories from a wide range of authors and illustrators. The adult reader can introduce children to adventure stories, funny stories, traditional tales, mysteries, poetry, and more. And reading this rich variety of books to children increases the likelihood of finding something that they engage with as listeners and as readers. There can be some children who aren't as motivated as others, and it might just be that actually they haven't had that exposure, that experience of hearing those books, experiences of those books, that really is the thing for them. So the more variety we provide, the better, because we're giving more children the chance to find that thing that works for them, the thing that's going to engage them as readers. And the main message that I want to get across in this session is that reading is teaching. The children learn from just enjoying stories being read to them. We need to prioritize this and feel confident that when we read to children, we are teaching them. And as the reading framework puts it, pupils would often gain more simply by reading or listening to a rich text, absorbing the teacher's occasional explanations and commentary, and joining in with discussions, rather than by spending time analysing its grammatical features or using it as a model for writing. So the reading framework is really clear there about the benefits of just reading aloud to children, letting them get lost in the story time. With the pressure of a busy timetable, it can be hard to prioritize reading aloud. Teachers can sometimes feel like we have to maximize reading time by maybe analyzing aspects of the text. While reading for pleasure is mandated in the curriculum, it isn't tested, which can mean the time for it gets squeezed out. But reading aloud is teaching. And Dr. Helen Hendry advised the government in her oral evidence that she gave to the Education Committee on Reading for Pleasure. Her advice was, we need to give teachers the power to understand that this is doing something of significant educational benefit. And she was talking about stories and reading aloud. And I hope that educators in this session can keep that message in mind when you're planning, that reading to children has significant educational benefit. So some next steps to think about. These are two of Ofsted's findings that schools and educational settings might want to consider when thinking about your teaching of English or of communication, language and literacy. Is there enough time being planned for reading aloud? And is there enough investment in staff training in all areas of communication, language and literacy, and not just in phonics? So these are two findings from Ofsted. They found that some schools do not make sure that all pupils have enough opportunities to hear text being read aloud. So that's Ofsted giving you the permission to focus on reading stories to children. And that beyond phonics, there is little training for primary teachers to build their professional knowledge about English literature and language. So training not just in phonics, but those other aspects of English that children need to become readers. And just some more next steps here for you to think about. So plan for all children from early years and also primary to have at least 4 20-minute read aloud sessions per week. Ensure this story time is focused on reading and enjoyment, and separate this from your lessons on grammar and comprehension. You should try to read a mix of classic and contemporary children's books and update this regularly. Ensure your read aloud books are varied, so different genres, authors, illustrators, writing styles and themes. Include diverse and representative books that can act as those mirrors and windows. And see if you can find time for increasing teachers' knowledge of contemporary literature, contemporary children's literature, just to be clear. Could time be made for teachers to read new books during staff meetings or potentially during training day time? And also work with parents and carers to increase awareness of those significant educational benefits of story time. We know that reading aloud is one of the things that parents and carers can do really well and probably can enjoy doing with children. So maybe just making them aware of the significant educational benefits will just give them that little motivating factor to make sure that they're prioritizing finding that time. I know that parents and carers will find that their time is very squeezed, just similarly to how teachers will, but maybe just making clear the benefits to them will help them find that time. If you have been inspired by this session to try some new children's books to read aloud, you can have a look on the Twinkl website for our collection of books. You can search originals on the Twinkl website, and you can look at our range of fiction, non-fiction, comics and poetry that we have for children aged 0 to 11. You'll find ebooks, printed books, audio, games and activities that all support reading for pleasure. And you can stock your book corners or your libraries by taking a look at our affordable printed book bundles and class sets if you are thinking about adding printed books and not just enjoying our digital offer.